Bradley Beal is open to a trade from the Washington Wizards. I'm not just pulling this news out of my butt. We actually have a credible source from The Athletic and officially from David Aldridge and Josh Robbins that explain the entire situation. So before we get to the content, I'm giving away $500 to one of my Instagram followers. All you have to do is follow me on Instagram at TheFlightMike. And of course, make sure you take a minute to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications for NBA news. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Bradley Beal wants to get traded. Well, not necessarily. He didn't come out and demand a trade, but he is open to being traded. That's the terminology here. Now, before we get to the article, it makes a ton of sense why this would go down. I was on record saying this past offseason that if the Washington Wizards traded Russell Westbrook, then they were probably going to trade Bradley Beal with him. Why should they keep Bradley Beal if they trade Russell Westbrook? But ultimately, they decided to pivot a little bit. And in what was a very interesting experiment, they traded Russell Westbrook for Kyle Kuzma, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and Montrezl Harrell. I can't freaking believe that they won this trade. And they were also able to swing a trade for Spencer Dinwiddie. Now, what was the initial theory was Bradley Beal averaged 30 points per game last year. He absolutely dominated. He was scorching red hot, the second leading scorer in the NBA, shooting 35% from three, 49% from the field, with a scalding player efficiency rating of 22.7. And then this year, he kind of came crashing back to earth. You could claim because they're a little bit stricter on foul calls this year, but at the time that we're making this video, Bradley Beal is dealing with an injury. Now, what's interesting about this situation is they tried to make Bradley Beal their version of Rockets James Harden, and clearly it didn't work. Spencer Dinwiddie, unfortunately, is a shell of his former self, and at the time that I am making this video, the Washington Wizards are considering trading Spencer Dinwiddie, because according to this anonymous executive, the claim is, I did hear that they could look to move Spencer if someone would take him, just hearing that he and Bradley Beal do not get along, which is fairly interesting. You never know what goes on behind closed doors. Obviously, Spencer Dinwiddie dealt with a major injury last year with the Brooklyn Nets. This year was seen as a potential bounce back year for the man, and unfortunately, he hasn't really been performing at the same rate that he was performing during his peak year with the Brooklyn Nets, although that's a pretty high mark for Spencer Dinwiddie, I must admit. So ultimately, the Wizards are in this situation where clearly they aren't playoff contenders. They are currently 12th in a surprisingly competitive East. And the teams ahead of them, in my opinion, are just significantly more talented. You have the New York Knicks, you have the Atlanta Hawks, you have the Boston Celtics, you have the Toronto Raptors. And it just seems like a huge uphill climb for them to reach any point where they could potentially compete for a championship or even a playoff spot. And I think at this point in Bradley Beal's career, when you're 28 years old going on 29, you've given your best years to a franchise, he's been there for almost 10 years, then it makes sense to part ways. Now, here's what the article says officially from David Aldridge and Josh Robbins, stating, with the NBA trade deadline just 8 days away, the Washington Wizards front office must make multiple decisions that will impact the franchise for years to come. And the first of those choices is the same one that the team has faced over the past few years. Will the Washington Wizards consider trading Bradley Beal? This is what we are hearing from league sources. Bradley Beal's long-term future still overshadows everything else. The Wizards face a sizable risk with whatever they decide to do. If they don't trade him before the trade deadline, he can become an unrestricted free agent in July and would be eligible to sign a 4-year deal worth approximately $180 million elsewhere. In that case, the Washington Wizards would risk losing Bradley Beal without receiving any players or draft picks in return. This is a very common argument for any small market team looking to trade a franchise player. Oh, what if we don't trade him and he leaves and we don't get anything? So this is nothing new. And then of course the article cites that Bradley Beal could become a free agent and re-sign with Washington to a supermax contract worth $241 million over 5 years. But in that instance, they have to pay a player that seems to be declining $48 million a year. Now, at the time that this article was produced, sources have heard no indication indications that the Wizards are seriously considering trading Beal. But in regards to what Beal wants to do, things are a little bit more uncertain. This seems like a very legitimate report because I think if anyone was in this situation, if they were Bradley Beal, they would be uncertain also. Multiple league sources have indicated that Bradley Beal remains conflicted. His desire to stay for his entire career with the franchise that took him 3rd overall in the 2012 NBA draft remains genuine, but Beal also remains uncertain about whether the Wizards can surround him with difference-making talent that will make them a regular playoff contender. His contention in a recent interview with NBC Sports' Chris Miller said that another play-in tournament appearance would be a step back for him, and that spoke volumes. Makes a lot of sense, man. I kind of feel for the Washington Wizards and Bradley Beal in this instance, because if you're Bradley Beal, you just want to be surrounded by really good talent so you could potentially make a push and contend for championships. And unfortunately, the Washington Wizards haven't really been able to do that since the prime, the absolute peak of the John Wall, Bradley Beal era. But at the same time, the Washington Wizards took multiple approaches to place Bradley Beal in positions of success. They tried to find him a different co-star last year with Russell Westbrook, which I felt like complemented Bradley Beal properly. And then this past year, they decided, okay, having Russell Westbrook didn't work out. Let's trade Russell Westbrook for a bunch of high-end role players and maybe Bradley Beal would perform a little bit better. But he took a step back. The team's nosedive since its hot start frustrated Bradley Beal, leaving him less sanguine about just taking the big bag next summer and staying in Washington. For the first time in a long time, sources close to Beal indicate he's not rejecting out of hand the notion of trade elsewhere. Even though his preference is to remain with the Wizards, neither Beal nor his representatives, though, have officially asked for him to be moved within a week left before the deadline. Again, all stuff that makes sense. It seems like Bradley Beal is looking at a scenario and says, I either make $240 million or I get traded to a team that is potentially contending. I did everything I could for this city. I wouldn't be offended if they moved on from me because the Washington Wizards are in NBA purgatory, and if they want to commit to a full-scale rebuild, it would make a lot of sense. Honestly, if I'm the Washington Wizards, I look at the fact that I have a bunch of high-end role players, like Spencer Dinwiddie could help a contending team. Same with Montrezl Harrell, I hate to say it, but also same with Kyle Kuzma and KCP. So it's in the Washington Wizards' best interest to become sellers at the deadline and see what happens with Deni Avdija and Rui Hachimura. You could still develop those two players. I personally, as a basketball fan, if I'm a Wizards fan, I would tune in to watch those two players develop. It's better than being stuck in NBA purgatory, and the article confirms that the Wizards have not changed their position. They want to continue building around Beal. They believe Wes Unseld Jr. will wind up being an upgrade at coach, and they still have high hopes that recent first-round picks, Rui Hachimura and Deni Avdija, have higher levels to reach. Above all, though, Governor Ted Leonsis continues to be adamant against a teardown and restart, which would begin by dealing Beal elsewhere. Now, this is where I disagree, saying I don't see them doing that because I think the owner would prefer not to go through the pain. They've got the right people in place in the front office, but Leonsis doesn't have the stomach for it. That is so frustrating. This is the year to tank, man. I'm gonna be honest. Like, if you listen to us on the Laced Up podcast, you'll listen to Get Like Coop and I literally getting horny over how great the talent in this year's draft class is. If you land with any spot in the top 10, you are golden. The top 3 picks could be #1 overall picks in any other draft this year. That's how stacked this year's NBA draft is. I don't know, maybe ownership thinks,
hey, if we keep Bradley Beal, at least we'll sell tickets.
But I would make the argument that if you had Paolo Banchero, or if you had Chet Holmgren, or if you had Jabari Smith, or hell, even Jaden Ivey out there, you would sell more tickets. You could get a bunch of assets. You could get good really, really quick. Just look at the Memphis Grizzlies. It took the Memphis Grizzlies 2 years to rebuild. I know the Atlanta Hawks aren't doing well right now, but the Atlanta Hawks went from an Eastern Conference Finals appearance in 2015 to completely rebuilding for the next 3 years, and then they found themselves in the Eastern Conference Finals again last year, and they were significantly more exciting to watch, mind you. Now, I know they are not looking so good right now, but this is just a bad play by ownership. Now, currently, in regards to who could trade for Bradley Beal, Philadelphia has made no secret that Beal is on its short list of players for whom it would trade disgruntled guard Ben Simmons for, who has sat out all season. But the 76ers won't include an additional piece, such as exciting young guard Tyrese Maxey along with Simmons in a potential trade for Beal per league sources. Philly has held firm confirmed that it won't put third-year forward Matisse Thybulle, a terrific wing defender, in a Simmons package. Honestly, I really like the idea of a Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal trade. Look, if you look at this from the lens of who's better than who, obviously, I don't think the talent matches, but I must admit, it would be a lot of fun to watch Ben Simmons surrounded by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Daniel Gafford, Denny Avdia, Rui Hachimura, Kyle Kuzma. Yeah, I know it doesn't sound super exciting to you, but I feel like Ben Simmons, in regards to helping other players develop, in regards to being a great playmaker for those players on a rebuilding team, in a situation where he's not expected to contend for championships, because I'm going to be honest, I don't think Ben Simmons wants to win a championship. I think he just wants to play basketball and make money and just blow that money on stupid crap like we talked about in our last video. But I like the idea of that. It says, in addition, league sources also believe that if the Wizards wanted to trade Bradley Beal now, they would receive a less than stellar return, because any acquiring team would run the risk of merely renting Beal for the remainder of the season and then seeing him sign elsewhere. Washington could solve that issue by permitting Beal's agent to negotiate with an interested team and indicate Beal's intention to re-sign with that new team long term, but sources do not expect that to occur. No team's going to give up the value that guy would command otherwise if there's not a deal in place. You could get something for the guy for sure, but I think a lot of places would be leery of giving up too much. Makes a lot of sense. They might not want a Kawhi Leonard type of situation, although Kawhi Leonard was an off-season trade, went to the Toronto Raptors, and then unfortunately left the Toronto Raptors 1 year later. Poor Raptors only got a championship out of the whole ordeal, but I could understand that as well. I honestly think this was a great article, very insightful. It goes on, and I don't know if you guys want me to make longer videos than this, so let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this, man. I personally think it makes a lot of sense for the Washington Wizards to trade Bradley Beal at this point, but let me know your take in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.